to get on with our program for today, as we mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be talking to Africa as a Country's inaugural fellows, well, at least some of them. And to remind you of what that is about, the fellowship program began last year, and the purpose of it was to support the production of original work and new content and knowledge on African-related topics that are under-recognized and undercovered in the traditional media, new media, and other public forums. It particularly seeks to amplify voices and perspectives from the left that addresses major political, social, and economic issues affecting Africans in ways that are original, accessible, and engaging to a variety of audiences. And we thought it would be an especially opportune time to bring on some fellows to the program, considering the fact that a few weeks ago we had Anakwa Dwamina and Bhakti Sringapore, and we were talking about how do we recreate this lively intellectual network and culture on the continent that is able to promote new research, new theory, and new writing. And hopefully the fellowship is one step towards doing that. So I'm very happy to bring on to the show a fellow, Youlendree Appasamy, who is a freelance writer and editor from South Africa. She's based in Johannesburg and studied at the university appropriately known as Rhodes, as well as Wits University, where she obtained her MA in political studies. And when she's not writing or editing words, she's thinking about how to do it better, which is, my struggle all the time as well. So Youlendree, thank you very much for coming onto the program. So far for the fellowship, you've produced one essay, and it's a really breathtaking essay on the intersection of indentured labor in South Africa, the class identities of South Africa's Indian community, and the reproduction of patriarchal violence amidst all of that. And it began as, I think, your MA thesis. So maybe a good place to start is why this topic? Why were you drawn to it?
I mean, well, I kind of just followed the silences in my family, really. It started at home, and I would find that when it came to family history, or how are we here, or why are we here, there would be certain silences and a kind of a need for me to just accept that this is how things are now. And I didn't want to accept that. I knew there was something else. There was another story. And when I was doing my master's at Wits is where I actually really kind of found a lot of work and research about indenture as it was practiced in South Africa. But, it was a colonial labor system, so it was practiced across British colonies all over the world. And the more reading really that I did on indenture, the more things started to make sense, and more those silences were filled out with a lot of narratives and stories and events that I find really valuable. And yeah, I'm really glad that it's also resonating with other people.
I think it's really striking that you've framed your foray into this as coming by following the silences. And, I think for a lot of people, the history of how Indians ended up in South Africa is silenced insofar as it's not really known, it's not really ingrained in public consciousness, and most people don't really know how it happens. A kind of almost mythical understanding that Indian South Africans just appeared and weren't brought here by force and compulsion. So could you maybe just briefly give us a breakdown of that history of indenture and basically being brought on here as a pliant, or expected to be a pliant and exploited labor force?
Okay. So the system of indenture was instituted by Britain to replace the transatlantic slave trade. And so it was seen to be a more humane way to get cheap labor to work in plantations. So sugar plantations, dairy farms, on railways, indigo farming. There was like a whole host of kind of agricultural and industrial pursuits that indentured laborers worked on. And so in South Africa, the first indentured laborers arrived in 1860 at Port Natal. Although that wasn't the first arrival of people from South Asia to Africa. I mean, the first kind of migration happened during the times of slavery happening in Cape Town in the Western Cape. And so indenture was a kind of second and bigger wave of people from South Asia coming to South Africa. And it was meant to be a more humane labor system, but that obviously wasn't the case. And rates of suicide were extremely high amongst the indentured population, and there were extreme kind of gender imbalances in terms of who was boarding the ships and also who survived the crossing from India. So all of those things kind of led to a system where this new kind of racial category was created in South Africa of, if you're not black or white or colored, now you're Asian. So there were the indentured laborers, and that migration led to that. And that also led to a whole bunch of, other things that apartheid kind of built on. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of indenture.